Well, good morning, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day to everyone. This is a week where we're in our country. We're going to celebrate love in many different ways, in many different shapes, by whatever that means to people. I think there's more candy and wine sold, and flowers probably as well, sold at this time of the year than any other. As people try to find a symbol, try to find something that can represent that ineffable, whatever it is that they feel, that is love. I want to start by sharing a story with you, and I know I've shared it before, but it just touched me, so I just want to share it and kind of set a mood for where we're going today. And as I told you, I traveled extensively in my business career, and spent many hours just sitting in an airport waiting for a plane to take me somewhere. And this event must have happened in the late 80s or somewhere in the 90s. I'm not even sure. But I was sitting in Atlanta. I remember it was the Atlanta airport. I was sitting and I was waiting for a plane, and I don't know whether I was going out or I was coming back, but I was sitting in Atlanta and I was waiting for a plane. And if you've ever been in the chairs, the lounge at the departure lounge, I used to kind of sit and just watch people walk up and down the hall. There's this constant parade of people, all kinds of people, young people, old people, all kinds of people, children, happy people, sad people, people in a rush, just all kinds of people. And it was kind of like better than watching the news programs they had on the TVs. So this one day I was sitting there and there was this commotion down the hall. I could hear a clamor. I could hear a change in the patterns of sounds that were coming from down the hall. It wasn't a loud ruckus. It wasn't like a fight or a riot or anything like that. It was just the sound changed, from just the sound of people kind of walking and talking to all of a sudden this more concentrated sound. And as I looked down there was a glow of light down the hall. It was very eerie. I could look down the hall, and the ceiling and the walls were just bathed in this absolutely brilliant white light. And it was moving towards me. The whole thing was kind of moving towards me. Kind of this big clamor, this big commotion, and this ball of light. Not in a sci-fi kind of way. Just it was brighter down there. There was something that was lit up. And as this whole scene kind of passed in front of this little window that I had looking out of my departure lounge onto the main hallway there to the concourse, it was President Carter and Roosevelt. He was no longer in office, and I don't know where they were going or what they were doing, but they were traveling commercial. And as they were walking down the corridor, the press was there, and the camera lights were what was causing this big glow, and walking backwards in front of them were the media, were the people with the cameras and the people with the microphones, and they were kind of asking questions, and then all around the side of them were people with notebooks and tape recorders and all kinds of things. It was just quite a scene as they went by, And I just remember that President Carter was very graciously smiling and answering your questions, and Rosalind was smiling. They seemed genuinely happy as they walked by. But this was, kind of one of those things that you see if you travel a lot. And after they passed, this little old man came walking down behind them. And I would say he was like in his late 80s, maybe his early 90s, And he was all spruced up in clothes that might have been in style 20 or 30 years before. And he had this little bouquet of flowers in his hand. It was, the kind you go in a grocery store and they've got those little bouquets of flowers there in case you're running in and you've forgotten it's somebody's birthday, or you're going to the hospital to visit, and you just, you get a little bunch of flowers for $5 or $10. And he had one of those in his hands. And as I say, his clothes were dated. He had a shirt on. It wasn't exactly a dress shirt. It was probably the best shirt that he had, and it was buttoned tight at the collar. I don't remember if he had a tie on or not. He had a little gray mustache and a fedora cap, almost like if you've ever seen Hollywood Squares. You remember Cliff Arquette played the character Charlie Weaver, and he had a little hat and he had brown slacks on and brown shoes, and his shoes were kind of, you know, turned at the heels, and you know, he just, you got the feeling looking at him that he was putting on the best that he had. This was the best that he had, and he was coming to the airport to meet someone special for him. And he turns and he goes into the lounge at the gate directly across from me, and there was a plane arriving there. Now, in those days, you know, this was before security was so tight, and people could actually go down to the gate and wait there to meet the arrival, to meet their friends and family coming off the plane. So it was kind of a mob scene. It was always a mob scene when the plane came in, and if you, when I was traveling, when you get off the plane, you know, it was kind of like running a gauntlet, because you're trying to get always the first people off the plane were the business travelers. They had frequent flyer miles. They were up in first class. They had everything stowed in the overhead compartment. And by the time the door opened at the gate, they were ready to go charging. And they would come out, you know, and they had to kind of make their way through this line. And there's all the people standing there looking, you know, straining their heads to see if their beloved, their friends and family are coming off the plane. And this gentleman was short, and he couldn't see. He was kind of standing in the back, and there was this big mob in front of him, and he could see him getting up on his tippy toes and kind of looking, you know, and he's got these flowers in his hand. He's got his, what I imagine to be his best clothes on, and he's looking, you know, and he's looking. So the business people come out and they charge and they go running for their connections, and then the general passengers start coming out of the plane, you know. And little by little they would come out, and somebody would greet them, and they would hug, and then, you know, they would go on their way. It's kind of like the scene at the end of the movie Love Actually, you know, everybody kind of greeting someone at the airport. And little by little the mob thinned out. There was hardly anybody left. You know, everybody who had come to meet someone had found them, except him. And he was standing there all by himself, this little bouquet of flowers, looking as if he could down the jetway, you know. And of course, as the plane empties out, then eventually the flight crew starts to come out, you know, and then maybe a few stragglers, the people who need a little bit more time walking, or people who have children and strollers and all those kind of things, you know. And he's standing there and he's just peering, and he's just peering. And then finally she came. Little old lady, also in her late 80s, perhaps early 90s, all dressed up, you know. People sometimes used to get dressed in their best clothes to travel. And she came walking down, and he went up to her with a big smile, handed her the bouquet of flowers, kissed her on the cheek, put out his elbow. And she took his arm, as I imagine she must have taken it many, many times in previous years. And their eyes lit up. They started chatting, and they went out towards the baggage claim together. There in the middle of the hustle and the bustle of Hartfield International, in the middle of press people following a former president down the hall in a big commotion, they're in the middle of people running every which way here and there trying to get their planes, there was love. There was love. You're never too old for love. There's no conditions on love. It was just love. So with that feeling of love in our hearts, today we want to talk about what is the surest path. When we talk about love in the spiritual sense, what is the surest path to the experience of God? Because the experience of God is the experience of love. He who knows not love knows not God. That's what the scripture tells us. But we need to understand what is meant by that word love. See, our language is awkward at best. If you go to the dictionary and you look up the meaning of any word, or several different meanings, it could be used as a noun or a verb or an adverb or whatever. And you have to understand the context before you can really decide which of those particular meanings fits in your situation. You know. if you just take a sentence from a different language and you go to the dictionary and you try to interpret each word based on the dictionary interpretation, you probably won't get it, because the words each have multiple meanings, and you lack the context. You don't know exactly which context is going on yet, because you don't understand the sentence. If you ever want to just have fun and you're really bored, go to one of the translator pages on the internet and take a little paragraph of English and translate it, say, from English to Spanish, and then copy the Spanish translation and translate that from Spanish to French, and then translate that from French to Chinese, and then translate it from Chinese back into English. And read the paragraph that comes back after you've gone through the 3 or 4 iterations, and it makes absolutely no sense. Makes absolutely no sense, because the computer doesn't understand the context. The computer takes the word and looks up a meaning and tries, I guess, through an algorithm, it tries to put what meaning it thinks applies, but it doesn't get it right. It doesn't get it right. So when we talk about love in a spiritual sense, we have to kind of stop and think, well, what do we mean by that? What do we mean by love? What is this thing called love? And are there degrees of love, or phases of love, or stages of love? And Plato talks about a discourse that Socrates gave on the ladder of love. The ladder of love. Like, think about that. Think about the imagery of that. A ladder of love. Right? So there's a rung that you step on first on a ladder, and there's a place that you begin. But then there's another rung above that, and you ascend. And then there's another rung above that. And each rung on the ladder of love is kind of a different stage of love, and an ascension over the previous one. Now, I'm not talking about a right or a wrong kind of love. I'm not saying that the love on the higher rungs of the ladder is the right kind of love, and the rungs on the lower level of the ladder are not. But they're different. They're different. And we need to understand that. We need to understand love in the spiritual sense, and we need to understand love as a path to God, a path to our experience of God. If we could describe an end point as far as we know, as far as we're capable of knowing now, maybe there's other people who are capable of knowing more, but as best as I can explain it now, our spiritual growth, whatever path we take, whatever practices we engage in, whatever studies we devote our time to, what all of it is geared towards, what all of it is moving us towards, is what Dr. Holmes calls the conscious experience, or the conscious realization of the experience of the presence of God. The mystical experience, the experience of the cosmic consciousness, as Richard Maurice Buck called it in his book. At-one-ment, not atonement, but at-one-ment. Rumi describes it as a moth flying into the flame, totally united with the flame. The bliss, the isness, the suchness. So if this is kind of our best understanding of where our spiritual growth is taking us, then we have to consider that there are different ways to get there, and there are different ways for different people. And I love what the quote that's ascribed to the Dalai Lama, and I've read it in some of his books, I've seen it on the internet, but I've also read it in some of his books. He said, how can it be that there's only one religion and yet there are so many religions? And he said, because there are so many people. And there's one religion that's right for each person. And each person must find that one, that path, their own path. They must find that. It may be part of an organization, or a particular path that's already been established, or it may be something that they forge on their own. But each one has to find the one that is right for them. And then they must follow it. Then it's not just enough to discover it. You have to commit yourself to it. You have to apply yourself to it. So in this thing that we would call spiritual growth, what is it? What is it leading us to? The word religion, the root word of religion, means to bind together. To bind together. We're binding something together. And that's a telling word, because you don't have to bind together that which has never been apart. Right? So there's an underlying assumption or assertion that there's something that's apart, and it has to be bound together, and religion is a way of binding it together. So in a similar manner, the word yoga is like yoke, to join together. And if you've seen the movie The Razor's Edge, the 1940s black and white version of The Razor's Edge with Tyrone Power and Gene Tierney. And what the movie is about is the main character, protagonist, is a character named Larry Darrell, and he has experienced World War I. He's gone through World War I, and it put him on a quest for meaning. What's life all about? How can this be? How can we as human beings go out and do these things to one another? He's trying to find the meaning of life, and he goes many different places. It's a very very well written story. I think it's Somerset Maugham, wrote it. About his discovery. It's about one man's journey of discovery, and the character winds up in the Himalayas, and he's studying with a guru. And what we in the West would envision as a guru. A man with long flowing white hair and a big white beard and long white robes, who just opens his mouth and wisdom comes forth. And Larry Darrell is got a stack of books. He's got this stack of books all around his side. Reminds me of sometimes when people first come into our teaching, they can't get enough to read. They're just buying books by everybody. Emmett Fox, Thomas Troward, Emma Curtis Hopkins, everybody, and reading all of these books at once. And Larry Darrell is like that. And he's talking to the guru, and the guru tells him, he says, there's three main paths to God. There's the yoga of service, there's the yoga of knowledge, which you have chosen through your books and your teachers, and there's the yoga of love. He says, at first it seems like there are three different paths, but you must take the one that calls to you. And after you follow it for a while, you find out that all three paths are really the same. The yoga of love. So the yoga of love for most of us, the yoga of love is the one that appeals most to us. It feels the best to us. As the picture I created of this gentleman waiting for his sweetie to get off that plane, it gives us this warm feeling. There's something about it. There's just something, the words can't describe it, but there's something about it that appeals to us. So which is the best path? And the answer is, it depends on us, it depends on you. And the best path is the one you're going to stay with. It's kind of like exercise and diet, Every day you can read an article about a different diet or a different exercise routine and those kind of things. Well, which one's the best? Well, it's the one you're going to stay with. It's the one you're going to stay with. That's the one that's going to be the best for you. And love, for most of us, love keeps calling us back. As the flame keeps calling the moth, love keeps calling us back. and it's easy for us to stay with it. So if we understand that it is a path to God, that we are we are trying to bind it together, to yoke together that which is only separated in appearances, only separated in consciousness, only separated in thoughts and in ideas, then we can understand how making love our spiritual practice helps us to get into that deeper experience. So that's the importance of love as a spiritual practice. But then we have to get through the business of, but what is this thing called love? What are you talking about? Are you talking about a rock and roll kind of love? Are you talking about I can't live if living is without you kind of love, you know? Or are we talking about something different? And this brings us into the definition of love. This brings us into the phases or the ladder of love and into an understanding of love. So just before I jump into that, we have to acknowledge that I think any religious organized thought that you study is going to talk about the importance of love. No doubt about it. You know, we're told that perfect love casts out fear. That if you don't know love, you don't know God. Every religion talks about love. But yet we have war. And we have war that is not only condoned, but in some cases initiated by religious leaders. And I'm not just talking about today. I'm talking about it's always been that way. So what human beings tend to do is we have different understandings of what love is, we have different definitions of what love is, and we have different conditions that we as human beings put on love. But yet pure love, perfect love, knows no conditions, requires no conditions. It is we, the human beings, who do that. So we tend to, in our human experience, we tend to rationalize or justify our actions. You know, watch the politicians, or if you're in business, watch your organization. You know, the beginning of the year, the leaders would come out with their goals and objectives for the new year. I'm talking about when I was working in corporate America. And every department, what we would do is we would go in and we would bring out our PowerPoint presentation of what our initiatives were, and we would reword them. The same initiatives, but we would reword them to show how what our department was working on was in support of whatever the new leader for the year said they wanted the organization to accomplish. So we pretty much had one chart slide presentation. We just kept updating it every year and rewording it, painting it with the new brush, so to speak. And this is what has happened, I think, in terms of the word of love. We are told, for example, love one another, love one another. And people immediately start deciding who that other might be. Well, it's other people who go to the same church I do, or it's other people who live in the same country as I do, or it's other people who think the way that I do, or other people who vote the way that I do. And I don't have to love those other people. See, I don't have to love those other people because they are not one of us. They are not the others. A few months ago, there was a piece in the news of a local reporter in North Carolina who got an interview with one of the leaders of a right-wing white supremacist group, and she's a person of color. And she went to interview this gentleman on his property. He had like a 20-acre farm somewhere. And he told her, he said, you know, you're the first person of color that I have ever had on my property. And she said, well, why is that? She was very, very polite, you know, very professional, very, very good at what she did, asked the right questions. And he immediately began quoting the Old Testament. And he began explaining how the tribes aren't supposed to mix and all these kind of things. So my only point is I'm not trying to condemn the man or judge him. What I'm saying is that we as human beings, we tend to do that. When I was selling, we were taught that people do not want because they have reasons because they want. And what people would tend to do is they would want something and then they would go back and say, well, we want it because it's an expression of love, or it's a perfect way of love. If we love God, we'll go kill God's enemies, for example. And God loves us, so we'll get to keep their gold and enslave their children. Just go read the Old Testament, you'll see what I'm talking about. But that's not the love. That's not that's the human concept of love. That's not the idea of love that I'm talking about. The complete, unconditional, agape love. So in the human context, we tend to think of love at first. Love starts out more or less as a transaction, transactional basis. In some of the European countries, you can see where they would betroth the prince of one country to a princess of another country, and they would get married, and that would ensure that the wealth stayed in the family and that peace existed between the kingdoms. And that's a transaction. You give me this, I give you that. You give me this, I will give you love. Maybe I'll give you love if you give me love, and we can love each other, but it's still a transaction. It's still two people using each other. Still a transaction. Using you to get love, you're using me to get love based on that human understanding, that human definition of love. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's the first step of the ladder, you see. It's the first rung of the ladder. Remember, life is using us for its purposes. Right? So like the salmon that has to swim upstream and spawn and then die so that its body feeds the plants in the pond, so that when the eggs hatch, they've got plants to hide among and to eat. Life is using them. There's something within life that is compelling them to go up that stream. They can't help themselves. They have to go up that stream. And in that biological sense, there's something that is compelling us to bring forth children, to marry and to bring forth children. And sometimes we confuse that compulsion, that urge, that with love. That's our first idea of what love might be. But it's only the beginning. It's only the beginning. But then as we start to grow, you see, as we start to grow, we understand that love is about developing a deeper understanding, a deeper appreciation, a deeper experience of our significant others. So we start out with love maybe based on beauty. This is where Plato starts, with beauty. We see someone, we say, oh my God, they're so beautiful, just there's something so special about them. I think I'm in love. And that's kind of the physical attraction that we experience, and that's only a starting place. Then we want to get to know more about them. We want to get to understand them. We want to get to spend time with them. We want to get to share more with them. And we're building a relationship then, you see. And now love is about relationships. So at the beginning, love might have been an attraction, but now love is a relationship. It is a life experience. And as we grow, we start to realize that love is more than that. Love is not a role. Love is not a responsibility. Love is not a relationship. Love is not an obligation. Although our songs will tell us all of that, our movies will tell us all of that. Love is an experience of unity. It is an experience of oneness. It is an experience of being kindred. So what we start to recognize then is that the people, the pets, the things in our life that we love, it's not just an appetite. It's not like, oh, I love hamburgers or I love butter pecans. I love the things that I feel one with. We're told that the greatest love is to lay down life for another. And I realize that that was put in the context of a New Testament scripture for a purpose. But Joseph Campbell, in his works, in one of his conversations with Bill Moyers, he expands on that. And he said the reason that that is so is that when a soldier sacrifices his life on the battlefield for another, that other person's life is not less important than his own. In other words, I can't let you die, because if I let you die, it would be like if I died myself. There's no separation. There's oneness. I think of you as I think of myself. I love you as I love myself. We are one. We are one. And it is that experience of oneness without condition. I don't love you because you give me gifts. I don't love you because of whatever. And like I say, at the beginning stages, love is a transaction. People may do that. I love you because, or I can only love you if. And if you do this, I can't love you anymore. If you do that, I can't love you anymore. And the agape love, the unconditional love that I'm talking about, has no requirements such as that. The New Testament tells us that the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. So as we grow in our spiritual maturity, as we start to develop more and more, we start to climb this ladder of love. So we might start off with beauty, and I recognize then that I love this person because they are so beautiful. They are so attractive. But then I realize that it's beauty that I love. It's not just the beauty of this one person. It's beauty. It's this abstract concept of beauty. And where can I experience beauty? Where can I see beauty? I think my tongue stopped working. I had a tooth pulled this week, so I think my tongue might still be a little bit numb. And we recognize then that beauty is not just in a person. It's in the sunrise, it's in the sunset, it's in the smile of a baby, it's in the tree growing in the backyard, it's in the squirrels at play, it's everywhere, see? And we start saying, well then what is it about beauty? What is this thing called beauty? Why does beauty appeal to me? And we say that, well, beauty is really a term that we put on harmony, things that fit together in perfect balance, things that are in perfect harmony. That's what we call beautiful. A symmetry, both sides of the face, proportion. We say, oh. So it's this harmony, it's this interworking of things, it's this realization of the way that things all fit together perfectly well. Now my understanding of beauty is changing. And then I come to recognize that God is perfect harmony. God is perfect beauty. God is perfect love. Everything is perfect within the divine. Everything is in its perfect place at its perfect time. The stars and the planets, the birds, the fishes, every cell, every organ, every tissue of our bodies. Everything in God's creation is perfect. Perfect. So now this idea of binding together, of using love, using the experience of love in our spiritual growth, means that what we are doing is we are casting out of our consciousness everything that would divide, everything that would separate, everything that would push apart. Because everything that divides and everything that separates and everything that pushes apart is only an idea. It is only an idea. And it is those ideas that keep us from experiencing the unconditional love that I'm talking about. So now love seems like the easy path. You know, we start out and we think, well, you know, this is great. You know, this is wonderful. I enjoy love. I enjoy being in love. I enjoy loving others. I enjoy loving the sunrise. I enjoy loving the sunset. I enjoy finding beautiful things in life every day and expressing gratitude for them, and that's my expression of love. And again, that's only a step on the ladder. Because then what we'll find is that this love that we're talking about is more than just a salutation, as Dr. Holmes would put it. More than just a warm fuzzy. More than just something to hold hands and sing and sway back and forth. But it is a burning desire that leads us into some of the difficult places where our greatest growth will occur. And by this I mean, what is it that you can't love? What is it that you are afraid of? What is it that you hate? And then we're faced with the age-old problem of hating the sin but loving the sinner. Can we recognize that there are people who do terrible things, and they may need to be isolated from society to protect society against them? But that doesn't mean we can't love them. That doesn't mean that we can't see them as a beautiful expression of God in the process of awakening, as we all are. If they had been further along in their development, surely they could not have done whatever it is that they had done. Any more than you or I, as we awaken on our path of love, could do harm to one another, because we'd be hurting ourselves. We'd be hurting all of life. We'd be hurting God itself. Or not that that's possible, but we recognize this person as an expression of divine love, and we wish them no harm. There's a program on one of the streaming channels, and it's I think it's a miniseries. I didn't watch it, but it's about Ted Bundy, who, if you don't know who Ted Bundy was a serial killer who was put to death in the electric chair in Florida many years ago. And I think our society is kind of morbidly fascinated with these kinds of things, because he seemed like a clean-cut boy next door, and he did horrific things and destroyed lives. But the story that I want to relate is that after years and years and years of legal wrangling, it finally came down to the fact that he was going to be executed. And they let him use the phone before the execution. And he called the woman who had raised him, his stepmother. I think she was in Seattle. And he called her to say goodbye. And he did. And they hung up. And he wanted to speak to her one more time. So he called her back. And they talked a little bit more. And when it was time, when she knew she had to get off the phone, she said to him, "You will always be my good little boy." And you've got to stop. You've got to stop. Here was a man who did terrible things. Here was a man who within a few minutes was going to be put to death. And what she could see was that good little boy, the good little boy she knew growing up. I think we all have to recognize that within each and every other person, no matter what they have done, somewhere in there there's good. Somewhere in there, there's the presence of God, who's just waiting to be revealed. And our telling them how rotten they are, how bad they are, how terrible they are, is not going to make that come forward any quicker. But our bringing ourselves to the point where we can see it, whether we tell it to them or not, bringing ourselves to the point where we can see it, that's our growth. That's our growth. We have to let go of conditions. We have to let go of roles. We have to let go of responsibilities. My love is not conditional. It doesn't depend upon what you do or don't do. My love is my love. I don't only love those who come to me in a certain role as their minister. I love because I am love. I don't love just simply because it's my responsibility, because you're a member of my family, or a member of my country, or a member of my political party, or a member of my tribe. That's not love. But we must come to the place where we love because that is what we are. We love because we can't help but loving. Meister Eckhart told his congregants, he said, I never thank God for loving me because God can't help itself. God can't help but love me. It knows me as it knows itself. It knows me as its own creation. Can't remember who the other author I was reading was. And they said, God loves like the sun gives light. It is a consequence of its being. This is the kind of love that is our spiritual path. This is the kind of love that leads us to dissolve all ideas of separation, of limitation, of apartness, of differentness, of worthiness, of conditions. So love then becomes not something that we do, not something that we take, not something that we give, but it becomes a consequence of what we are. Love is the experience of unity, the experience of oneness. God is perfect unity. God is perfect oneness. When I can experience love that completely, I'm experiencing the presence of God. And now you see how the concept of love has changed from, well, I find this person attractive, to I recognize the presence of God right here, in this room, in my midst. The very presence of God has come to be with me today. We need to take love up that level. We need to take love to to a different level. So how do we do that? You know, it's not 3 easy payments of $99.99 to buy the tapes or whatever they're selling. You start where you are. You have to start right where you are. See, that's the interesting thing about us as human beings. We always want to start halfway towards where we want to go. Start where you are. Where are you when you feel love? Who are you with when you feel love? What are you doing when you feel love? Pets are a wonderful, wonderful expression of unconditional love. Do you feel that? Do you feel that when you're with your pet, when you're playing with your dog or your cat or whatever pet you might have? But give yourself to love. Kate Wolf was right. Give yourself to love. Is it out in nature? Is it going for a walk? Is it the sunrise? Is it the sunset? Is it being on the beach and watching a dolphin or the porpoises as they gracefully make their way up and down the coast? Whatever it is, take time to feed that. Take time to celebrate that. Take time to enjoy that. And as you do that, widen your circle a little bit. Try to bring in somebody or something you're not quite sure of. Can you find a way to see the presence within them? And keep doing that until that person that you thought there was no way anybody could ever love, until you can see the presence of God within them. Start where you are. Start in the mirror. For most of us, that's harder than loving another person. Can we look in the mirror and learn to love ourselves as God loves us? Then we'll be able to take that love and cover the whole world with it. I think we have come here to to learn love. I think this is the perfect environment to do so. The opportunities present themselves every day. Let's just go be love. Because in the end, nothing else matters. All the money is turning to dust, all the buildings are turning to dust, our bodies are turning to dust. Someday the sun will explode and the planet will be gone. But divine love, the experience of unity and harmony and beauty will always exist, and you will always be part of that. And so it is.